Let's open with a prayer. Father, we thank you for your grace, your amazing grace in our lives. That when we've been there 10,000 years, bright shining as the sun, we've no less days to sing your praise than when we first begun. Lord, may your Spirit deeply touch us today. May we be challenged and transformed as we look to your word in Jesus' name. Amen. A number of years ago, Kevin Costner was in a movie called Field of Dreams. Great movie. And in this movie, he's a baseball fan. His father was a baseball fan. He left his father on uneasy terms, that they weren't getting along. And he ends up doing exactly what he thought he would never do. He ends up in Iowa on a farm, farming corn. And then he hears this voice speaking into his head to build a baseball field in the middle of his cornfield. And so he does. And everybody thinks he's crazy. And then he starts seeing people, baseball players, major league players from the past, playing on his field. And everyone thinks that he's crazy. It never reveals in the movie that it's God speaking to him, but that's how I read it. And so I'm wondering today, if we were to just envision a cornfield, our own field, maybe we could hear the voice of Ruth speaking to us words of wisdom that transcend time and bring us to this place where we are today. Ruth's Field of Dreams. So just keep that kind of tucked in your mind as we move forward. So we ended last week saying, so Naomi returned from Moab, accompanied by Ruth the Moabitess, her daughter-in-law, arriving in Bethlehem as the barley harvest was beginning. So we're finally moving into chapter 2. It's actually happening. We're going to head into chapter 2, but we're going to keep looking and understanding the culture of the times. And one thing that we know is that the harvest in those days was not at all like this. That is not how they did it in Ruth's day. It was a little bit different. Just a little bit. I'm amazed as I look at the technology and how a field can be harvested that fast, leaving virtually nothing behind. Amazing. But that's not how a harvest took place in Ruth's time. Here's another YouTube video that I found.
I've been picking a bit of barley because it's getting nice and ripe now. It's all golden and bending over where the ear meets the stalk. So it's time to fetch some of it in. This is the second batch that I've picked, so let's show you what we got going on. As you can see, I've picked a few ears in this bowl here, and there's 2 steps to getting it ready, the threshing and the winnowing. I'm doing it all by hand, so to thresh it, basically all we're doing is just scrunching it and scrunching it and scrunching it like this to break the ears up and get all the little bits of straw and chaff and whatnot off of it. So it takes a little while. We're just going to do this for a little while. I was hoping it'd be a bit breezier tonight because the winnowing is the next stage after we got all this done. And I'll show you that in just a moment. Okay, that was about 3 or 4 minutes just playing around with that by hand. As you can see, I've knocked all the grains pretty much off of the ears. Let's pick a couple out here to show you. As you can see, they've had all the grains stripped off of them. They're fairly light. As I was saying, the wind has died down to practically zero. What should be happening when I do the winnowing here is that the breeze just carries all of the chaff straight away, but as you can see, pretty much everything is just falling straight down here, so it's not really doing the job that it needs to do. So giving it a little blow with my breath just to help the matters along. Yeah, it's kind of a fool's game. We might have to leave this till tomorrow till we got better breeze. Okay, so it's next morning and there is a little bit of a fickle breeze, so we're going to try this winnowing again. And it's a few minutes later now. The wind kept coming and going, so I kind of put it down and came back to it. But a few minutes of winnowing, and here is the finished product. Let's reach in and just show you like that. All the grain is falling straight down. All the chaff's been blown out of it, so this is pretty clean, and it is ready for either replanting, or what the plan is save enough up and try and make a very small batch of homebrew. So one of the steps to do next is figure out how to actually do the malting and drying process. But that's for another video. Meanwhile, have fun.
So I'm not promoting alcohol, but that's what he's using, the barley for. And I found that's one of the major differences between barley, and wheat is some of the uses for it. But isn't it interesting that the harvest depends upon not only the manual labor of threshing and breaking up all of that wheat, but also the dependence upon having a breeze to blow the chaff away, and the process that has to take place. It wasn't anything like what we saw John Deere doing just previously. Some other information I found out, it takes 1 square foot of space for 1 bottle of beer. 63,000 bottles can be made from 1 acre. So if you want interesting thoughts. Okay, so we already looked at this, but it's worth looking again, that God gave a mandate to feed the widow, the poor. And we looked at these verses, and it's worth looking at again, Deuteronomy chapter 24. When you beat the olives from your trees, do not go over the branches a second time. Leave what remains for the alien, the fatherless, and the widow. When you harvest the grapes in your vineyard, do not go over the vines again. Leave what remains for the alien, the fatherless, and the widow. Remember that you were slaves in Egypt. That is why I command you to do this. And then again in Leviticus chapter 19, we read, when you reap the harvest of your land, do not reap to the very edges of your field or gather the gleanings of your harvest. Do not go over your vineyard a second time or pick up the grapes that have fallen. Leave them for the poor and the alien. I am the Lord your God. So there is this mandate in the harvest to leave some behind for those that are poor, for those that are widowed, for those that we've been talking about, Ruth and Naomi. So now, drum roll, we're finally looking at Ruth chapter 2, and I just want to read through these first 17 verses that we're going to be talking about today. So let's look at that. I know it's small, and I'm only putting that there so you see the amount that we're looking at today. Sometimes you don't get that if you just look at it at a verse at a time. So here's Ruth chapter 2, 1 through 17. Now Naomi had a relative on her husband's side from the clan of Elimelech, a man of standing whose name was Boaz. Interesting that Boaz gets introduced first. You know, it's like a good storyteller. They're telling you something that's going to happen, but it hasn't quite happened yet, just to whet your appetite. So it's very neat that the author does this first, because Boaz doesn't come on the scene for a little while yet, but he's mentioned. And Ruth, the Moabitess, said to Naomi, "Let me go to the fields and pick up the leftover grain behind anyone in whose eyes I find favor." Naomi said to her, "Go ahead, my daughter." So she went out and began to glean in the fields behind the harvesters. As it turned out, this is storytelling. As it turned out, just then, this is great storytelling. As it turned out, she found herself working in the field belonging to Boaz, who was from the clan of Elimelech. Just then, Boaz arrived from Bethlehem and greeted the harvesters. "The Lord be with you. The Lord bless you," they called back. Boaz asked the foreman of his harvesters, "Whose young woman is that?" The foreman replied, "She's the Moabitess who came back from Moab with Naomi. She said, 'Please let me glean and gather among the sheaves behind the harvesters.' She went into the field and has worked steadily from morning till now, except for a short rest in the shelter." So Boaz said to Ruth, "My daughter, listen to me. Don't go and glean in another field, and don't go away from here. Stay here with my servant girls. Watch the field where the men are harvesting and follow along after the girls. I have told the men not to touch you. And whenever you are thirsty, go and get a drink from the water jar the men have filled." At this, she bowed down with her face to the ground. She explained, "Why have I found such favor in your eyes that you notice me, a foreigner?" Boaz replied, "I've been told all about you and what you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband. How you left your father and mother and your homeland and came to live with a people you did not know before. May the Lord repay you for what you have done. May you be richly rewarded by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge. May I continue to find favor in your eyes, my Lord," she said. "You have given me comfort and have spoken kindly to your servant, though I do not have the standing of one of your servant girls." At mealtime, Boaz said to her, "Come over here, have some bread and dip it in wine vinegar." When she sat down with the harvesters, he offered her some roasted grain. She ate all that she wanted and had some left over. As she got up to glean, Boaz gave orders to his men. "Even if she gathers among the sheaves, don't embarrass her. Rather, pull out some stalks for her from the bundles and leave them for her to pick up, and don't rebuke her." So Ruth gleaned in the field until evening. Then she threshed the barley she had gathered, and it amounted to about an ephah. What we've been trying to do in this whole series is not just look at it from a theological standpoint, but from the story itself, making the story come alive and being aware of the hurt, the harm, the emotions, the bankruptcy, all of what is going on. Ruth doesn't come into Bethlehem without baggage. Ruth comes into Bethlehem carrying more than what many of us would be able to carry. So I thought about how could I convey this in a way today where it makes sense to us, where we could enter into the place where Ruth is right now. Remember, she's a widow. That's a big mark against her. Last week we talked about the fact that she was barren and couldn't have children, and that was a mark against her. And those two things combined set her up for alienation for the rest of her life. Add to that, they came back to Bethlehem with nothing, poor. So I found this video. It happened to show up on my Facebook feed this week. You may have even seen it, but I'm going to play a video right now because I want you to touch deeply into your emotions.
Good morning, Your Honor.
Andrew, you have 4 different registrations. You have 5 tickets that go back to 2004, 2005, and 2006. Can you prosecute those tickets?
No, Your Honor, not from '04, '05. We won't even have copies of those, Your Honor.
Those matters are going to be dismissed.
I wasn't aware of them. Anyway, I'm sorry.
Well,
Thank you.
The issue isn't whether you are aware of them. The issue is whether or not they were placed on the vehicle, and they were. At the time, you were living on 9th Street in Woonsocket. We're keeping track of you. Then you got a ticket on Friendship Street in 2008. That was a parking meter on Friendship Street. That's going to cost you $25. Then you have a parking meter in 2014 on Friendship Street. It's going to cost you $25. So far you're doing pretty good because all you got is $50. And now you have 4 parking tickets.
Are you talking about the most recent ones
Most
now?
recent ones, right?
All right. The one on 11-1.
On the Nissan.
Yeah, the one on 11-1, I went to Social Security because they had cut my check. Because my son was recently killed last year. So they cut my check because he had owed money.
Who?
My son was killed March of last year, right? So I was his rep payee. So they took my money because he had owed money. So I had to go to Social Security to fix that matter. When I came out, I had a ticket. Then another time on the 5th, the parking meter wasn't working. I have the picture for that. On 1/4, I was at court because my landlord was trying to evict me. So I was at eviction court. Come out, I got a ticket. Mind you, he won possession of the apartment, so I had to move. So I got a ticket, he won possession of the apartment. Then I get another one because I tried to go to the legal services to try to get help to fix this. I go get some change out of Dunkin' Donuts, come out, I got a $100 ticket.
What was
It's
the
like I can't win.
what was the situation with the mix-up in Social Security with your son?
My son was killed last year, March of last year. They said that he owed $75 of overpayment from May of 2016. Mind you, he was already deceased at that time. So what they did was they stopped my whole check until I went in there to fix the problem. So when I came out, I had a parking ticket.
All right.
I've had a tough year already. I'm on SSDI. I don't have $400 to give you on top of whatever else. I really do. I just had to come up with money for a new apartment. I'm still paying Russell and Boyle for my son's funeral. Like, I don't know where this money's supposed to come from. I wish I would have got my brother that night and he wouldn't have killed my son. That's why my son's gone. And I'm just really having a tough time, Your Honor.
I think we can all express our sympathy to you and understand the trauma that you have experienced.
I'm still going back and forth to court for that. There's still emotions and I don't know.
I'm going to take all of the circumstances that you just have explained to me into consideration and see if I can balance the equities to protect the interest of the city and take into consideration, the horrific story that you just told us relative to your son. I don't think anyone in their lifetime would ever want to experience that, so.
It's the worst feeling in the world. I feel so empty, Lord.
I'm going to reduce this to $50. How much time do you need to pay it?
I have it on me now.
All right. That's not going to leave you without any money, is it?
I'll leave here with $5. Thank you, Your Honor.
I'm not going to leave you with $5. I'm not going to leave you. I'm going to dismiss everything.
Thank you.
All right. with our best wishes and hope that things turn around good for you. Okay.
Thank you, Your
Good luck to you. Good luck.
So that's a television show on ABC that is called Caught in Providence, and they film different court cases. When I was an engineer, probably the most common thing that we talked about at lunchtime was how much money the government was taking from us. We talked about the percentage. We talked about how incredible, it was that they would keep so much money. And those were our favorite conversations, And then I moved into ministry, and I started working with college students, and I started to see that things were messed up, and that we had a system that broke people and kept them broken. I used to look in the paper and see that somebody was arrested for driving without a registration or driving without insurance, and I used to think, how stupid is that? If you don't have insurance, don't drive. And I started realizing that some people are driving their cars without insurance. Some people are driving their cars without a registration because they don't have the money. Because they're choosing to pay for some ramen noodles to put food on the table instead of paying the car insurance. Or maybe they can't afford the inspection sticker that is there, and maybe they can't afford the repairs that are going to be required when they get the inspection sticker. And we have a system today that keeps people broken. It keeps people broken. And so you have someone like this who lost a son, and because of that lost her Social Security check, and because she lost her Social Security check and couldn't get that straightened out in any kind of timely manner, that she lost her apartment, and then she got a ticket while she was getting her apartment, and she's got $400 in parking fees that she can't afford. We have a system designed to help people that's broken. Ruth is in a system that's designed to help people, but it's broken. God says to leave a percentage of the field, to leave the corners untouched, but how much is a corner? God says to go over the field once and leave scraps, and the intent was to leave stuff behind for other people, but people were gleaning their fields as close and as tight as they could to maximize things, and we do that today. I mean, I'm not blaming, the John Deere. I mean, that's what it was designed to do, is to eliminate anything left behind. But that was some of the mentality of many of the fields. And if you were a widow and you weren't attached to any male figure, you didn't have a brother, you didn't have a husband, you didn't have a son, then you were the most vulnerable person in those fields ever. If you went to the wrong field, you would be abused, you'd be hurt, you'd be taken advantage of, and you certainly wouldn't find food. But that doesn't stop Ruth from taking the initiative. That doesn't stop Ruth. She's not passive at all. She is without food. Naomi, her mother-in-law, who she has vowed a lifelong vow to be with in the same way that we would pledge to husband and wife, Naomi has pledged to her mother-in-law, and she's not passive. Ruth says to Naomi, "Let me go to the fields and pick up the leftover grain behind anyone in whose eyes I find favor." Naomi said to her, "Go ahead, my daughter." So she went out and began to glean in the fields behind the harvesters. Ruth takes the initiative. Ruth goes out and she starts working in a field, putting herself in danger, being vulnerable, and she chooses a field. And we see the timeline, and we see that Ruth has a lot of downturns in her life. And now we're wondering, is this another downturn? Is she going to go out in the field? Is she going to be hurt, abused, and neglected? Is she going to be taken advantage of? She makes a request to the overseer of the field that she ends up at. And she makes this request. She said, please let me glean and gather among the sheaves behind the harvesters. She went into the field and has worked steadily from morning till now, except for a short rest in the field. She's working hard, and she makes a request to the overseer to go out among the sheaves. Unheard of. Unheard of. In the system that Ruth lived in, the harvesters were the hired hands, the men, and they would go out and they would grasp stalks of barley with a sickle. They would cut them down and lay it down on the ground. That was the men's function, that they would go out in the field, like you saw those harvesters of the John Deere mowing through the field a little bit slower. But the men would go out, grab stalks, cut it down, lay it down. That's the process. The women, the female workers, people who were employed by the field owner, would then go out and gather all of the stalks together and tie them up. And then everything that was tied would be picked up by the laborers, the workers, and they would be brought into the threshing floor to be threshed, like we just saw. And then, after the bundles were removed and brought away to the threshing floor, the field was opened up for people who needed to glean, for the poor. That's when the gleaners were allowed access to the field. Except Ruth's request puts her there. She goes to a field to someone that she doesn't know, being as vulnerable and as unprotected as she is. And she says, can I glean among the sheaves? And the overseer of the field lets her. Unheard of. I wonder if there were people ready to glean that saw this and had the same mentality as Jesus in the parable of the workers, in the field, saying, hey, wait, that's not fair. Okay, well, I just went 2 slides. Hold on. As it turned out, okay, so just then, Ruth is gleaning in the field. Try that. So this is the story, the just thens, the music changes. Because Ruth is working in this field, and she has no idea what's going to happen should the field owner show up. She may be working incredibly hard to gather as much as she can before that happens. I would imagine that there's a knot in her stomach, that she's concerned, that she's anxious, that there's tension, anxiety, hope, nerves, suspense, that all of this is going on. And the music changes as Boaz approaches. Just then, it says Boaz comes up to the field. And I'm sure she's wondering, is this where I get rejected? Is this where I get kicked out of the field? Is this where bad things happen to me? Is this, what goes on? And Scripture says, as it turned out, she found herself working in a field belonging to Boaz, who was from the clan of Elimelech. making it a cousin of Naomi. Just then Boaz arrived from Bethlehem and greeted the harvesters. "The Lord be with you." "The Lord bless you," they called back. It's a small verse, but we need to unpack that. Somebody sneezes. You know, when Sharon was up here, I was thinking she was going to sneeze. She did sneeze. And when someone sneezes, what do? What do we say? God bless you. God bless you. When someone sneezes, what do we mean by that? Is there any depth to that? Do we really have any kind of depth to that? Or are we just saying, God, you know, the same as how you doing? We don't really care. We're just, how you doing? Let me tell you, invoking the Lord's name in Ruth's time was not a simple sneeze, God bless you moment. This is a prayer being invoked. Boaz's first thought on his mind when he enters the field is to tell his workers, the Lord God, be with you. And they reply back, the Lord bless you. There's a healthy relationship between Boaz and the workers. Can you imagine being Ruth trying to grab as much grain as you possibly can before the owner arrives and rejects you, makes you leave, or hurts you, abuses you? Can you imagine the relief when this is what she hears, the first words that she hears? The Lord bless you, and all of the workers say, the Lord bless you. The relief, the thought that the God of Israel was with this person, that this wasn't Boaz's field, that this was God's field. We know that it was more of a request. We know that it was more than just a simple request, could I glean? Because gleaning was allowed. Gleaning was the law of the land. It would be like asking permission from a cop who's directing traffic. Is it okay if I walk on this sidewalk? Yeah, you can walk on the sidewalk. She didn't have to ask permission to glean. She was asking permission to glean among the sheaves, where all of the crop was, where the best was, where she would gather more than anywhere else, where she wouldn't be the last in line. Can you imagine, I think of, Annie has gone shopping on the Thursday, Friday after Thanksgiving, and sometimes you see on the news people fighting over being able to buy a TV at a low price. Imagine when they open the fields to the people who are hungry and the people who are trying to glean, and the pushing and the shoving and the kicking, and Ruth is set apart from that. She's protected from that. And so Boaz says to her, my daughter, listen to me, don't go and glean in another field, and don't go away from here. Stay here with my servant girls. Watch the field where the men are harvesting and follow along after the girls. I've told the men not to touch you. And whenever you're thirsty, go and get a drink from water jars that the men have filled. God is elevating and showing us a clear example of a godly woman who's not afraid to take on the challenges of the world. It's incredible. And we know it's more than just that it is an unusual request because of her unusual response. He says, yes, you can glean. Well, he says, yes, anyone can glean. But what's Ruth's response to all that's being done? At this, she bowed down with her face to the ground and exclaimed, why have I found such favor in your eyes that you notice me, a foreigner? It was a radical request, a dangerous request, a bold request that was honored. Verse 12, may the Lord repay you for what you have done. This is what Boaz is saying. This is why he's doing this. May the Lord repay you for what you've done. May you be richly rewarded by the Lord, the God of Israel, whose wings you have come to take refuge. This is a prayer. This isn't just a request. This isn't just a blessing kind of thing. This is Boaz praying to the God of Israel for her. He has no idea that he's going to be the one who fulfills and answers this prayer. Naomi replies, "May I continue to find favor in your eyes, my Lord." She said, "You have given me comfort. I've spoken kindly to your servant, though I do not have the standing of one of your servant girls." Do you think she just said that? Do you think that Ruth just said it? I believe that Ruth, just as you saw the woman before the judge in the video, when she received grace and all things dismissed, that Ruth broke. "You've given me comfort." This is the first time comfort is mentioned in her life that we've known it. "You've given me comfort. You've spoken kindly to me, though I do not have the standing of one of your servant girls." But then she's given that standing. At mealtime, Boaz said to her, "Come over here, have some bread and dip it in the wine vinegar." When she sat down with the harvesters, he offered her some roasted grain. She ate all she wanted and had some left over. She's invited in. This is the story of the gospel, being invited in. We're going to partake in this table very shortly. We're being invited in. As she got up to glean, Boaz gave orders to his men, "Even if she gathers among the sheaves." This is unheard of. "Even if she gathers among the sheaves, don't embarrass her. Rather, pull out some stalks for her from the bundles and leave them for her to pick up. And don't rebuke her. Don't put her off. Don't send her away. Let her work among the women gathering the bundles." Unheard of. Unheard of. I also find it interesting that it says here, "as she got up to glean." When I was an engineer and we sat in the cafeteria talking about how much money the government was taking and how unjust it was, we would sit there for the rest of the afternoon until one person got up. Are you with me? One person gets up, and then what happens? Everybody, and you hate that person. But that's the person who's got a task to do. That's a person whose mind is on the job. That's a person who has that, achievement skill set that, and she gets up. She's the first to get up. Boaz gives order to let her glean among the sheaves. So Ruth gleaned in the field until evening. Then she threshed the barley that she had gathered, and it amounted to about an ephah. So you saw in the video how much work it was to glean, to thresh a small bowl. What she ended up with barley was an ephah. So trying to put that into context with what we would understand, that's about 11 2-liter bottles of Coke. By hand, somehow separating it out and bringing it home. So in closing, what can we talk about? Well, we can just hit the next one, Shea, thanks. Once again, we're just reminded that barren, rejected women are not marginalized in Scripture, but they become part of God's story. That God uses the tenacity of Ruth into our story. Hunger and the difficulty of the poor, perhaps we take, I don't want to judge you, I take way too much for We look in our kitchen cabinets and we say there's nothing to eat. When Ruth would have been blessed by one shelf. We need to be more mindful of the hungry and the difficulty of the poor. We don't know the situation behind it, but what we do know is that once you get there, you can be trapped, and you can't get out without someone coming in and redeeming you. It's God's field. We're all gleaners. We're all gleaning in God's field. I guess the question to end with is, what fields are you in control of? You yourself, what fields are you in control of? In the movie, Field of Dreams, there comes a place in the storyline where a girl falls off a set of bleachers and she stops breathing. And one of the players from days of old, getting a chance to play again, something that he was denied in his life. He's got the chance to play, but he's denied the chance to play, and he becomes a doctor. And so he sees this girl fall and stop breathing. And in the movie, if they cross the baseline, if they cross the line off of the field, then they return back to where they are today. And so this person is getting a second chance to play with the big leaguers. It's his lifelong dream, but he becomes a doctor instead, and he sees the girl fall. And in this moment, where they're trying to figure out what to do to call an ambulance, and an ambulance is far away on a farm, and what's going to happen, the player living his dream walks to the sidelines and steps over the line and saves the girl. I think Ruth is stepping over the line today into our lives as we read this scripture, as we take this all in. I think that Ruth is crossing the line, and she's looking to save us from missing the real opportunity. And the opportunity isn't playing a game. The opportunity is fulfilling what God has called you to do. For this person, it was to be a doctor, and he recognized it, and he had no more regret, because he knew that what he was doing was the right thing and what God had called him to do. And what field has God put you in charge of? And how can you be a Boaz to a Naomi? That's the question. Because wherever you are, that can take place. I did some further research. This went viral this week, this video of this mom who lost her son. She set up a GoFundMe page to pay for the funeral expenses. She was looking for $10,000 to cover the cost of the funeral. This started going viral on Monday. And when I looked and I decided to use this video, like around Thursday, she was at $20,000. And as of this morning, when I left this morning, she was at $26,625 were raised for this woman. You think that makes a difference in her life? I was here on Tuesday when one of the people came to get food. Someone homeless came to this church, came to this field to get food. And he shared that someone had robbed him. He's living in a tent, and someone had robbed him and stolen his fishing pole, and he was wondering if anybody might have a fishing pole. Deb sent out an email to people asking if anybody had a fishing pole, and a fishing pole has been found. And so this Tuesday, when he comes to get food, she'll give him a fishing pole something small can make a huge difference in someone's life. We're going to close with a hymn, and then we'll continue with communion. But let's just think, as we take up this morning's offering, let's just think about what field you're in charge of, because it's directly relatable to the offering that we have this morning. What field are you in charge of, and how can you be a Boaz to a Naomi, to a Ruth? How can you invest in someone else's field? We'll take up this morning's offering. Thanks.